Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 15th of December 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Garish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. Well, the best weather comment is really that it's mild, overcast and dry. That seems to be the picture across most of UK, and we'll leave it there.
Yes, Brian, terrorism is a growing threat, and we've got to bring Daesh to justice, apparently. This is according to Jeremy Wright, QC, on screen, who, of course, is the Attorney General. Well, what does he do? He has overall responsibility, apparently, for the international rule of law.
My goodness, that's quite a responsibility.
Isn't it? So he also superintends the Crown Prosecution Service, apparently, and takes decision on whether domestic prosecutions can be brought for terrorism offences which have taken place abroad or concern the affairs of another country.
Right.
So he's in New York today, and he's supporting a campaign to bring Daesh terrorists to justice. And he's going to meet with United Nations officials. He's going to discuss the role of domestic prosecutions of Daesh and its followers. And he's going to reiterate the importance of gathering and preserving evidence to enhance global accountability efforts against terrorism.
I just wondered whether I could ask, is there a definition of Daesh at this point from this gentleman? Because it is confusing as to whether Daesh is ISIS.
That's true.
Or Al-Nusra or Qaeda.
No.
Right.
No, we don't have these definitions. He's going to tell the United Nations that the UK has successfully prosecuted 71 offenders of terrorist acts, which relate to conflict in Syria and Iraq. But of course, he's only going for the foot soldiers. He's not going for the founder members, indeed. So sadly, Tony Blair is still not prosecuted for causing this whole mess in the first place. What did he actually have to say? He said the international community has united to defeat these organisations. And we've already seen many successful prosecutions in the UK. By working together to investigate international terror crimes, we can make sure terrorists are brought to account for the crimes they commit, even when the offences have taken place in other countries. Well, echoing this, I suppose, was Sir Stuart Peach, who is the Chief of the Defence Staff. And he was speaking at RUSI, the Royal United Services Institute, and he said, I worry about the global reach of Daesh as an idea, copycat using the internet, more than the internet, using social media, popping up all over the world. So he's worrying about that. Yes. Yes, okay.
I'm just smiling slightly because, I've used the expression a lot, and is it Alice in Wonderland or La La Land?
I don't know, but
does Stuart Peach even know what social media is? I wouldn't have thought so.
Don't know. He said that the Chinese state has accepted they have a problem. This is not a localized phenomenon, it's now a wider phenomenon. And of course, we face a potential network of combat experienced terrorists, and they're moving in migrant flows, hiding in plain sight, apparently. And of course, one of the obvious deductions, he said, is how do we manage identity in a world where people are desperately trying to destroy their identity documents as they move through these migration flows? Is this a silly suggestion? Perhaps we stop the causes of the migration?
Well, we couldn't do that because, of course, the migration is designed to break down traditional structures of governance in Europe and every country it touches. So those poor migrants are being used as a political weapon. And I think we're going to be able to show a bit more of this on the news. It's fascinating, though, that China's brought in as an example of another nation state that's having problems with these terrorists, because we weren't too happy with China as far as Syria was going, because they were helping to actually fight the terrorists in Syria.
Indeed.
With the Russians, of course, and the Russians are very unpopular because they're fighting the terrorists.
Well, in fairness, China's not actually doing any fighting. They're doing a lot of the rebuilding at the moment.
Absolutely right. I'm sure there's quite a lot of support going on in the background.
I'm sure there is, yes. Okay, well, let's talk about Syria because the evacuation of eastern Aleppo has begun, apparently. But in the meantime, we have this article from Finian Cunningham in Sputnik. Great article. Please read it. NATO ops caught in Aleppo is West's worry. And I'll just read the opening paragraph or two. He says, this could explain why NATO governments have been so anxious in recent weeks to halt the Syrian-Russian offensive in Aleppo? Could it be that they need to extricate their special forces embedded with terrorist-dominated militants? Imagine the world headlines that not even compliant Western media news media could suppress if the Syrian army with Russian air support liberated the last redoubt of al-Nusra Front, only to find amongst the defeated jihadists professional troops belonging to the US, Britain, France, or some other NATO member. Well, we're certainly hearing that that's exactly what the fear has been in the last few weeks.
Well, absolutely. Of course, this is a difficult subject because information coming in on this side has to be carefully treated because of the sensitivity to people who are prepared to speak. But what we've been told on several occasions is that British special forces operating Syria, deeply unhappy at missions they've been given, which we were told simply involved killing people in order for that to be blamed on the so-called terrorists. And it appears that these special forces said, no, we're not going to do that. That immediately meant that they were at risk themselves, because what do you do with men that don't want to follow British government policy? Do you murder them? That was a concern. But of course, special forces have been put into Syria really totally unprepared for the impact of the Russian intervention. So I think there's something pretty dirty and messy going on. Are some of these special forces troops, whether they're British, American or French, for example, are they going to be caught out in some of the rebel areas? Almost certainly yes. Have some of them been injured or wounded in attacks on terrorist areas? I think that's a probability as well. But of course, we need to remember that British special forces are funded independently of the rest of the defence budget. So this is within secretive, controlled and very, very large budgets, which is simply the domain of the executive of government. So this is where...
Is that the Cabinet Office?
Well, I can't say, Mike. We could be talking the Cabinet Office. Is everybody in the Cabinet Office privy to deployment of special forces? I would think not. So we're talking a very secretive group of politicians who think that they can use British special forces as a private army. This is the danger. So very nasty stuff going on. And have British forces been caught up in it? Almost certainly.
Well, the threats continue. This is Chatham House, and this lady, Lena Khatib, was on BBC Newsnight last night giving an interview. And so Chatham House was tweeting this out today, a quote from that interview. But the tweet says, "We shouldn't just focus on the Battle of Aleppo and think this is the beginning of the end." And the quote that Lena gave during the interview was, "Unless there's a political transition in Syria that changes the regime, replaces it with a transitional government that has wide representation from all sides, then we will see long-term instability in Syria." And I'm afraid that reads to me like a bit of a threat.
I'm sure it's a threat, and of course this has come out of Chatham House, and we've continually pointed a finger at Chatham House as one of the many powerful change agents, which are almost certainly funded by City of London money and George Soros money. So these are the very people that hold meetings behind closed doors. The public is not going to see the agenda or the minutes of the meeting. And in fact, if any statements are made publicly, then the Chatham House rule says, well, you can mention what was said, but you mustn't mention who said it. And of course, political charity Common Purpose has prided itself over a great many years on working under those very secretive Chatham House rules. So these are the people doing the dirty deals, I think, Mike.
Yes. So this morning, the Independent newspaper published a disgraceful list of things that you could do to help with the Aleppo situation. And one of the things they included on their list was to give money to Oxfam. Well, I'm going to say Oxfam has some questions to answer, really, because I'm finding this campaign, a fundraising campaign from multiple charities over the Yemen situation, particularly disgusting. And the reason is because, of course, this conflict in Yemen has been going on for a significant time now. We are providing many of the weapons for this campaign to be prosecuted by Saudi Arabia. We're giving Saudi Arabia the support that it needs in order to continue the bombing in Yemen. Even the Americans, where Obama has just issued an executive order to take the restrictions off arming the so-called militants in Syria, even America is stopping arms going to Saudi Arabia at the moment. We are not, however. So 2/3 of Yemen population urgently need humanitarian assistance, says Oxfam. We are here. You can help. Give Oxfam all your money, and what they will do is very little in the conflict zone, and they're certainly not speaking out in any way to get this conflict stopped, and get the bombing stopped.
Well, I'll just add to that, Mike. I now get great satisfaction from certainly not donating to any of the major charities, but doing something on a much smaller local scale where I know where I am giving that actually the result of that is benefit to real people. So I think the international charity scam is another area which wants a lot more investigation. And several years ago, the charity sector in Britain was an industry worth a mere 44 billion. It's grown considerably since then. 44 billion pounds a year, supposedly going in charity to help people. But of course, the answer is that the top 10 charities took most of that 44 billion turnover. Where that money went and what it actually achieved, very little evidence.
Indeed. I'd probably advise people to be careful at this point, because this just gets more ridiculous by the day. The Mail reporting the European Council on Foreign Relations, and the headline is pro-EU think tank says Russia and Syria could be orchestrating migrant sex attacks to swing the upcoming German elections. And they're really concerned that this is an orchestrated campaign by Russia and Syria to rape as many people as possible, or women as possible, in Germany to make sure that Angela Merkel doesn't get re-elected. Brian, this gets more insane by the day.
Because they're desperate is the answer, Mike. They are absolutely desperate that they've lost control of the situation in Syria. That was a key part of the dominoes of regime change. And now they're flailing around looking for an excuse. We've had populism. That's been one excuse. It's the fault of the public because we haven't believed the right thing. And now we need to label those Russians as something even worse. This is heading towards Germans being accused of chopping off babies' heads in order to get more people to enlist for the First World War. This is propaganda that we've seen before, but I think it's desperation. And if you regard it as desperation, it's got to be good news, because these people are beginning to hurt because of the power of people to communicate over the internet. So my prediction is for 2017, you're going to see a ramp up of rules and an agenda to take control of any means of getting on the internet with any truthful news at all. Right, well, at that point, we better bring in BBC Media Action. I tweeted this out last night because I thought it was highly appropriate. The BBC, desperate to fulfill the British government's objective of regime change in Syria. I've pointed out that senior officials from Media Action have actually boasted of their ability to get into Syria and help foment unrest, subversion to help bring down Assad. But I thought it was appropriate now that we remind ourselves of where the funding has been coming from for BBC Media Action. And of course, if you look at this, overwhelmingly, this is political funding, not just from UK, a massive 10 million from UK Department for International Development, but we got 3 million from the European Union. We've got 2.6 million from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. And then it gets interesting because we've even got the US State Department pumping in 2 million, United Nations, and the Dutch government. So overwhelmingly, this is not a charity. This is a complete scam. It is, it's fulfilling government and international government agenda. And we know it is boasting that it had been into Syria to help regime change. So I find this organization particularly objectionable. They claim on their website that they are a charity. They claim that they're independent of the BBC, when in fact, amongst other things, they use BBC office space and they share the BBC pension pot, which of course we all help to pay for. So if you feel as outraged as I do with the activities of this organisation, then of course the way to deal with it is to start to inform other people and indeed challenge the organisation itself as to why it is doing what it's doing. Well, bring in another change agent, and who better than this one, which is of course change.org, or as I've labelled it here, allchange.org. And we'll have a little look at why that is. So this was emailed to me this morning, and of course it's talking about those outrageous Russians who apparently are busy bombing hospitals and murdering civilians in Syria. There's no mention of UK and US funded terrorists who are the cause of the problem, but change.org saying sign this petition because we need the British government to get involved to stop what's happening. Well, is this just ignorance on the part of change.org? I don't think so. I sent them a reply. I actually knew what would happen, but I thought it would be fun to see it on screen. This is their reply. It says this is an automated reply, and basically text is a bit small, but this is saying you have to use another email address, and it's in multiple languages. As you can see, it goes on and on. But what I wanted to just bring home is, what language do you think was bottom of the pile, Mike?
Don't know.
Well, it was actually Russian, which must have been just a coincidence, I think. But let's have a look at change.org and what it's about. And of course, no better place to go than The Guardian. And here we've got the chief executive, Ben Rattery, and he was in this Guardian article in an embedded video being interviewed. So let's have a look at what this was about. It says here that Ben Rattery speaks to The Guardian's Jane Martinson about the popularity of his social activism website and his vision of a fairer society. So don't worry, this man is all for a fair society. He says his company will now offer 18 weeks paid leave to both mothers and fathers of newborn babies. This is in stark contrast to most US firms, which allow mothers to take only 12 weeks off entirely without pay. So The Guardian here, phenomenal investigative journalism, Mike, because they talk a little bit about the company and then they're interested in the maternity policy.
And just before you move on, I'll just mention that it's interesting that he has a vision of a fairer society.
Yes.
Early in the new year, fairness is going to be a feature of a new series of articles from us. So this is an important area.
Yep, absolutely. Well, let's see how fair it all is. Let's bring this young man in. And he is incredibly young. If you think of the power this man's got, he's operating in 18 countries. He's got millions and millions of people involved in his network. But he says the reason people are not engaged in national politics is the sense that it's toxic and not adding to good in the world. But when they're afforded the opportunity to get involved themselves, they act. So it's only a sense that it's toxic. It's not really toxic. It's just confused people tend to think it's toxic. But if you get involved with change.org, you can act. And one of the questions put to him by The Guardian was, how do you safeguard people in the vast wealth of data you're collecting? To which he said, hiring the right people who have the capability to build the infrastructure to protect data. And the best protection for people involved in activism is awareness about these people as well. I hope you followed that. So he's there hoovering up detail after detail about people who are being active and, of course, challenging government nationally and globally. Well, the lady says to him, and are you confident in your ability to protect someone, say, who wanted to put up a petition in China? And this is his reply. He says, in circumstances with governments that might be hostile, they should consider their safety when they start the petition. There have been petition creators who've anonymised their name when they start the petition, because they are the sort of person who tend to be most subject to government attack. So this is a bit of an obfuscation reply, Mike, in as much as what he really says is, yes, if you get involved with my site, you're going to make yourself a target if you live and work in a authoritarian state. So he doesn't really have any protection, but remember the data being collected. Well, let's bring in this organisation because very quickly we discovered that Omidyar, if that's the right expression, invests 15 million in Change.org in May 2013. So he's a young man, he's created something, and then very quickly in come millions of dollars from this very strange organisation. So let's have a look at them. This is the boss man, Pierre, and of course he is for the greater good. He's an entrepreneur, philanthropist, best known as the founder of eBay, an online platform that gives people equal access to information, opportunity, and the tools to pursue their goals. So he created eBay in 1995 on the premise that people are basically good, and continues to serve on the board of directors. Today, eBay enables more than 90 million buyers and sellers to connect and prosper over shared interests. So my point here is we've got a nice little connection between very big money, and now we've gone from Change.org, which is all about the greater good, to eBay, which is about the greater good and making quite a lot of profit. So let's put this together in a UK column wiring diagram so that we can see how the pieces fit together. There's Change.org, and of course we've just had the injection of $15 million, as you do. And let's remember that what they're doing is collecting massive amounts of data on people who want to challenge their governments or the establishment. So we had a little look at the funding company, and we'll bring in this guy here, which is Mr. Matt Barnick. And we find very quickly that he's actually tied into PayPal, and of course PayPal and eBay intimately connected.
Or were, yes.
Well, were
up until a couple of months ago.
Yeah,
that's absolutely right.
Yeah. What's going on behind the scenes, we don't know. So, right. So let's see the areas that they're interested in: governance and citizen engagement, emerging technology, financial inclusion, which means getting poor people access to big money. Education sits in the middle because they're interested in children, and property rights. This gentleman, Matt, links through to this organisation, which is the Global Social Impact Investment Steering Group. And the interesting thing about them is that they're an offshoot of G8.
Okay.
So we've now got a nice little network forming of who's who. Bring in this man, international banker Ronald Cohen, and we'll have a little look of him in a minute. And we just remind ourselves here that Change.org is being used to help the regime change in Syria, which of course is one of the international global agendas. And that brings us back to the email that I received this morning. So the minimum we can say here is we've got a pretty interesting mix of social media data collection and big bankers.
Yep.
It gets better. And let's have a look at this organisation. Here it is, the Global Social Impact Investment Steering Group. And this is a little of what it says about itself. It was established in August 2015 as the successor to the Social Impact Investment Task Force established by G8. It's continuing the work of the task force in catalysing a global social impact investment market across a wider membership. Are you with me so far,
Yes.
Mike? Good. And if we jump down a little bit to the bottom, it says the GSG is working to increase momentum by promoting a unified view of impact investment, facilitating knowledge exchange, and encouraging policy change in national markets.
Ah.
So here we are, we're starting to get into the fact that We're not allowed to conduct business as it's been conducted for thousands of years. Here is the political interference in the market system. So who is Mr. Cohen? Well, very easy to see because he's got a very glossy website all about himself. Encourage people to go and have a look at him. And you very quickly find that he's involved with that Global Social Impact Investment Steering Group. And he's also a member of the Portland Trust. He's a co-founder of the Social Finance UK, Social Finance USA, and Social Finance of Israel, and of Big Society Capital.
Of course.
So this is the key man who has been behind David Cameron's Big Society. And of course, we've consistently been saying on UK Column that Big Society has not disappeared. It's building fast in the shadows. So if we take a closer look at Mr. Cohen, here he is. And he's actually chair of the Global Social Impact Investment Steering Group. And from his website, we can see the people that he's been steering. And here we have David Cameron. And of course, this was to do with David Cameron setting up Big Society Capital, which is the means by which we're to be governed as Westminster is undermined and collapsed. David Cameron, of course, had to be a key player. But let's bring in our old friend and a very youthful looking Gordon Brown. He looks a little bit like a schoolboy in the headmaster's study there, I think, Mike.
Yeah.
So he's there. This is all about social impact and how markets are changed from the inside. And we've got our old friend, Tony.
So, and all three of these friends all have offices of X Limited.
Indeed, because
Yes.
these people are embedded in this system, which is these are the leaders who are going to be running government as they collapse Westminster and standard procedures. And if that's not enough, we better bring in Al Gore. Here they are together. It's like a couple, isn't it? Leaning towards each other, clearly in love. And so this, we can say, is tied in with such things as climate change as well. And I'd just say, look at this man's eyes, because kindly eyes, I think, Mike.
Yeah, he looks...
He's the sort of man that if you're needy, you should go to, because he's gonna reach in his pocket and pull out some of those billions he's got. Well, maybe not. Now, tomorrow is the final day for UK Column in 2016. We will be back on the 4th of January. I've got to say that unfortunately, due to a family bereavement, I can't be here tomorrow. So, Mike, you will be saying farewell to 2016.
Yes.
But join us in the new year because I think that 2017 is going to be a very, very special year. And a final reminder that Tom Crawford is in court tomorrow in Nottingham. There's the address, 10 o'clock start, and he would certainly need some support with this very strange case where he's been charged with criminal damage of his own property.
Now, speaking of governance and changes to governance, of course, one aspect of this that we've been highlighting this year has been the rise of the cities. And here we've got the 7 lessons for the new Metro mayors issued by the Centre for Cities today. And they say a number of cities will soon be electing Metro mayors for the first time, while their policy portfolios vary as to each deal arranged. The new Metro mayors will have powers over transport, housing, skills training, business support, strategic planning. These powers are similar to those held by the Mayor of London. This briefing, therefore, lays out 7 lessons for a successful mayoral term. So what are the 7 lessons? One is to have a vision to guide your mayoral team and your big policy priorities and to communicate it. And then number 2 is to set out clear, achievable strategy priorities to deliver your vision. 3, find the changes that will be enacted early on, and so it goes on. But number 7 is to forge and strengthen international links and presence. Well, just to make sure that we understand what's going on here, we can, from a week or so ago, have a look at this article from Cityscape. Can mayors actually rule the world, is what they're asking. Because what's on offer here, of course, is a governance model which is unrecognizable to anyone who thinks they live in a democracy. What we're looking at is out and out feudalism. And I think we'd all be pretty wise to pay attention to this. So this article, Can Mayors Actually Rule the World?, says increasingly in recent years, we have seen growing calls by city governments for more autonomy and new international forms of collaboration. Make no mistake, in doing so, local authorities seek to restructure the areas in which they operate in ways that could fundamentally shift long-standing forms of global governance dominated by nation states. The movement towards an expanded international role for cities has been enshrined in documents that resulted from the recent Habitat 3 conference on urbanization. It also has been replicated in multiple new collaborative organizations and activities, the Global Parliament of Mayors in September and the C40 Mayors Summit, which took place last week, and more. And they go on to say that that what's being created is a global mayoral elite. And they say if we don't reflect carefully on the obstacles and potential fallout from cities asserting their governance agenda on both the national and global stages, we could ultimately see new political conflicts over who has the right to govern urban territories. And what struck me most about this article was not that these political conflicts would be between individuals or societies and those who are governing them, but would actually be between the various factions of the governors, if you understand what I'm saying. So they are completely ignoring the general population in this. Just to keep this on track then, on the same day we had an article in City Lab from Benjamin Barber, who of course is pushing the Global Parliament of Mayors, a governance alternative to faltering nation states. And he says, let's count down the list. There's Brexit, of course, Brazil, Belgium, Spain, Venezuela, and the Philippines, all looking increasingly dysfunctional. Reactionary populism and xenophobia have risen in power in Hungary, Poland, and astonishingly the United States, with similar threats in France and most recently Italy after the defeat of Renzi. Strongmen such as Putin and Trump are deemed saviors of democracy and nationhood. The search for alternative democratic institutions capable of global leadership has never felt more critical.
They're worried.
They are. But the question is, Brian, is this so-called reactionary populism a genuine mass response to globalist insanity, or is it being created through what we might call it the Purple Revolution? I think it does reflect a genuine groundswell of opinion, as we've been saying. But I also recognize that globalists have a real skill of pushing in the direction of travel as hard as they can, hoping to push everything over so they can reorganize things afterwards. So I think we've got to be pretty vigilant about that as well.
The business about people being measured when they see what's going on is very important, because measured, cold, calculated analysis and getting the information out to other people works extremely well, because you're not going to be easily swayed by that sort of push.
Absolutely. So Benjamin Barber then went on to say in this article, here's the good news. On the weekend of the 15th anniversary of 9/11, the launch of an extraordinary new global governance project took place in The Hague, with 70 cities and 24 urban networks in attendance. Mayor Josiah van Aartsen of The Hague hosted the convening of the inaugural Global Parliament of Mayors. This was an event 3 years in the making, and it resulted in the formation of an entirely new governance body for, by, and of mayors, designed to give cities a powerful global voice, as well as an innovative platform for common urban action. Now, we warned that this was coming in April this year in this article, The Global Parliament of Mayors and the Abolition of the Electorate. If you haven't read this article yet, please go and do it. It's a fantastic article from Martin Edwards. The key point here, I'll just read the last couple of paragraphs of this because it's important. Martin said, the colour of the candidate's political allegiance will not matter. He was talking about mayors to be elected in this country and whether they are Labour, Conservative or whatever. They will be bound by a global covenant of mayors and other international agreements. We have witnessed this conjuring trick before when referenda were held for elected regional assemblies. When those votes went the wrong way, it became clear that unelected regional assemblies already existed. He says the drive towards elected UK mayors represents the rising tide of benign-sounding global governance model This is a UN-imposed dictatorship masquerading as part of our national democracy. As we have consistently pointed out, co-conspirators include those trained by pseudo-educational political charity Common Purpose. The future role of mayors will be to protect the global interests dictated by UN Agenda 2030 and so on. So this is the point that we were making. And just to provide the quote from the Mayor of The Hague at the Global Parliament of Mayors, the Global Parliament of Mayors will deploy collective urban political power, manifesting the right of cities to govern themselves, as well as the responsibility to enact viable cross-border solutions to global challenges. This is the era of interdependence, where nation states are increasingly dysfunctional and cities are everywhere rising. The moment has come for cities to take the leap from effective local governance to true global governance.
Yeah, and this is so dangerous, Mike, because of course this language is like one huge sweetie to people who are running cities at the moment. You give the political party that's in control of a particular city, say Sheffield, you say, we are going to give you even more power. We're going to give you more power to make laws. We're going to give you more power to take people off the streets. We're going to give you more power to take people's homes away from them. It's all about more power for an ever smaller group of people. Mm. And of course, we're seeing that in any local authority, even though they may be a chamber of elected representatives, councillors across a number of parties, the city is then ruled by an inner circle cabinet, which may only be 6, 7, 8 people. So if we take Sheffield, I think the budget for Sheffield is about £1.9 billion. Who controls it? 8 people. This is very, very dangerous stuff.
Okay, policing. We've another part of the change agenda. Well, police are all to have degrees from 2020. This has been announced by the College of Policing. Of course, College of Policing sets the standards for ethics and training in the police. And they say that 38% of people currently joining the police have a degree or postgraduate qualification. Well, they're going to change that. The Chief Constable, who's responsible for the College of Policing, said it's a very lopsided situation. And we don't do a lot of professional development training. He said the nature of police work is getting quite complex and it's quite contentious. And the public expectation is that you'll be patrolling in my street. And by the way, you'll be patrolling online. So this is all about cyber once again. We don't think the investment has been made in policing in terms of professional development. And this is one of the ways that we're going to address that. So how are they going to address it? Well, here's the plan from the College of Policing. They're talking about a 3-year degree apprenticeship. They're also talking about postgraduate conversion courses or coming in with a degree which is self-funded. But of course, if you go in with a degree apprenticeship, basically this will be done where you'll be working 80% of the time in the job, 20% of the time as a student. That'll be funded for you. And then, of course, there'll be obligations on you to stay in the police for X amount of time and pay that tuition fee off. So the syllabus, what it's going to do, it's going to cover law, apparently. It's going to cover safeguarding the vulnerable. It's going to cover understanding how an officer behaves on the street and how an officer builds trust by interacting well with communities. So I'm feeling a lot better about this already. They're also going to create a national set of qualifications for officers who will have to do these following promotion, including a requirement that those applying to be an assistant chief constable or above have a master's degree. So,
well, I don't feel confident at all, Mike. And the simple reason is that, of course, the mental reframing of these people will be done during those university degrees. We've seen problems in the NHS with the fact nurses go for a degree and come away with lots of book knowledge, but no knowledge of the practicalities of doing the job. And it's now also been suggested, of course, that, it's happening through theatre shows. Nurses are being taught how to show compassion to patients. So apparently universities are now able to teach us how to have basic human instincts and reactions. I think this is unbelievably dangerous.
Well, Brian, Brexit means Brexit, and we are leaving the EU, but it might take a decade, and that's according to the the UK's EU ambassador, well, that's Sir Ivan Rogers. But unfortunately, according to the government, he's just a gloomy pessimist, and we should just ignore everything that he says, because really they don't recognise this 10-year figure. And of course, we know that when they say they don't recognise things,
it must be true.
It must be true, yes, exactly. So a Downing Street spokesperson said that we don't recognise this. The government is fully confident of negotiating a deal to exit the EU that works in the interests of both the UK and the rest of Europe. Well, David Davis, of course, was speaking to to a select committee yesterday, and well, what did he have to say? He said that he's not really in favour of a transitional deal, which is what Philip Hammond's talking about. So there's a bit of conflict there. And he said that there are 4 possible outcomes that are being considered. One is to be inside a customs union. One to be partially inside a customs union, which is the Turkish model. One is outside with a free trade agreement. And one is a customs agreement and completely outside. So that's good. And he said that he's committed to publishing a white paper pretty soon, but possibly not until February. But actually, he doesn't really know when it might be published. It could be any time, really. But it's going to be as soon as he can, once all the research and policy is completed. So that's good, isn't it?
It's very good, and it fits the pattern. The agenda will be, of course, to carry on dismantling proper systems of government within UK. Don't forget all those plans to close Westminster due to massive billions of pounds of repairs needed for the building, if you believe that. So we dismantle UK's system of government from the inside while delaying Brexit, and then all of a sudden it doesn't really matter because we're locked into this new system of networked mayors and city-states.
Absolutely.
So, as predicted, it's a scam. Well, are we going to be able to rely on the Royal Navy to protect us? Just a few words on this, but this little briefing paper was put in our direction last 24 hours. The Royal Navy's new frigates and the National Shipbuilding Strategy, December 2016 update. Well, the new frigates, I can tell you about that. There aren't any. There was plans to bring in the Type 26, but that all got too difficult, too complicated. So they decided to scrap that plan. But they are in the future going to bring in the Type 31 frigate, and so we will have less ships in the future because they're going to order less of those than they were going to order of the Type 26. So I think it was the second Sea Lord was very confident that the Navy was increasing in size, but it does appear that it's actually reducing. But I think he was probably just a little bit confused, probably hadn't been briefed properly. So here's the contents. And of course, what's interesting to see is that this report is linked into a report by Sir John Parker, because he's been looking at how we can completely revitalise Britain's shipbuilding, including the use of virtual shipbuilding. I think this is very good, Mike, because I think you could probably build a virtual ship in a morning using the right form of computer technology, modelling. Yes. Well, here's the summary. I had hoped to read you a bit of that, but we're running a little bit short of time. Do go and have a look at this document yourself. What the summary says is that Royal Navy procurement is now such a shambles, nobody knows what's going on, and as a result, we're going to restructure the whole of UK shipbuilding. But the document was interesting because it says here quite clearly that there are 900 shipbuilding firms in the UK. So I think the oceans must actually be awash with ships. They're coming off the slips all over Britain. Except when you go to look and see how many ships were built in Britain, it all gets rather wishy-washy, because here's some stats that have come out of the British government, known for its reliability and telling the truth. And you can find lots of information about the registering of ships, but I couldn't actually find anything about the building of British ships. But even if we look at registered vessels, we can see that Britain is now down to 20 in the world. So we claim to be, I think it's 4th or 7th wealthiest country. We're an island, but we don't have any ships. But not to worry, because we've got 900 shipbuilding firms, and we're going to produce a virtual Royal Navy.
So what kind of ships are they building? Model ships?
Well, they've been building a lot of rubber boats. There's some rubber boats been ordered at Portsmouth, I think.
Right.
So there we are.
Good stuff. Good. I just wanted to bring this one up to finish off with Royal London Hospital told to improve security over concerns mothers might leave with the wrong baby. That was according to the Independent. And this is referring to a Care Quality Commission report on the Royal London Hospital. And to quote the Independent here, they say, inspectors said that there was lax practice in checking babies' name bands, saying this could create a risk that a baby might receive medication intended for another baby and a mother might leave the unit with the wrong baby. Now, unfortunately for the Royal London Hospital, this problem was actually identified 2 years ago in January 2015 in the previous Care Quality Commission report, where maternity, among other sections, received an inadequate rating, and security was exactly one of the features of this, one of the reasons of it. So the way this works is the Care Quality Commission goes in, does an assessment, they produce a report, they come up with an action plan with the hospital, they agree a time scale that the action plan is going to be implemented, and they then go back for follow-up inspection, and that's what today's report is about. Now, in fairness to the hospital, I have to say that they had 4 areas of provision in January 2015, which were given inadequate ratings, and they have dealt with 3 out of those 4 to some degree. So they've got to be applauded for that, and I think that probably demonstrates that staff within the hospital are doing their best under the circumstances that they find themselves. But something that was highlighted by the Care Quality Commission was understaffing. Now, I was speaking to somebody this morning who works in maternity in London, not in this hospital, but in the London area, saying that they are heavily understaffed in maternity, that there are some shifts where there should be 6 staff on, where they only have 2 on. There are staff being sanctioned for not filling in the forms properly because they simply don't have the time to do it properly, and so it goes on. But what was interesting, something else that this person told me, was that recently they had been given presentations on microchipping technologies, ID mechanisms, and so on. Well, my understanding is that the staff response to that was not positive. So people were not terribly happy to be given this type of presentation.
So we've just described very simply how Royal Navy procurement and new ships has been reduced to chaos in order to get a new agenda in. Hospitals management just reduced to chaos, stressing the staff. What's the agenda? Microchipping babies.
Well, that seems
possibly
to be one agenda, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, that brings us to the end of today's news. I'm going to say personally, thank you very much to all the people who've supported UK Column over 2016. I'm sure Mike will repeat this tomorrow. But I'd also like to say to the many, many people who've got in touch with us because they have suffered at the hands of the state. They've been victimised. They've been beaten up in police cells. They've had relatives die under unpleasant circumstances in hospital. They've had their children stolen, all of these things. Can I encourage you, excuse me, to stay in contact with other people and to do your very best to work with other people. The agenda of the criminal regime which is running Britain at the moment is to isolate people, to have them at each other's throats, and to make sure that nobody can work properly as a team. And that is what we need to do for 2017. It is to work together, particularly helping to protect and support people who are taking the brunt of this vicious criminal organisation which calls itself the British government. I look forward to seeing you in 2017. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.